Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and all our online and offline participants. We are delighted to welcome you all to the roundtable discussions on the result of the survey on mutual perceptions of ASEAN and Korean youth. My name is JoongAng from the ASEAN-Korea Center, and it is my great pleasure to carry on today's roundtable under the theme of enhancing mutual perceptions for equal partnership between ASEAN and Korean youth. We would like to express our sincere appreciation to distinguished panelists and experts and all our participants from ASEAN and Korea who are joining us for this event in the afternoon. Now, let us begin by inviting His Excellency Kim Hae-yong, the Secretary General of the ASEAN-Korea Center, to share his welcoming remarks. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Good afternoon and good morning. 안녕하십니까? His Excellency Gandi Sulistiyanto Soeherman, Ambassador of Indonesia to the Republic of Korea and Chair of ASEAN Community in Seoul, and distinguished panelists, guests from ASEAN member states and Korea, and online viewers. I'm pleased to welcome all of you to today's roundtable. After a 2-year journey of conducting surveys on mutual perceptions of ASEAN and Korean youth. Perceptions play critical roles in laying the foundation for mutual understanding. The Cambridge Dictionary defines perception as a belief or opinion based on how things seem. It can be shaped by how people interpret their information, thus become a powerful force that affects their reliability and trust. In this context, youth perceptions are the yardsticks to gauge the progress to be made between ASEAN and Korea, because they are the future shapers to strengthen mutual partnerships. The ASEAN-Korea Center recognizes a need to take the initiative to identify youth perceptions and examine any recent changes in the minds of ASEAN and Korean youth for each other, with an aim to analyze trends and factors associated with youth perceptions. The Center conducted 2 rounds of surveys. First, we conducted a quantitative survey last year on 3,300 ASEAN and Korean youth or so. Respondents were generally positive about current and future ASEAN-Korean relationship. In addition, the overall findings signal the need to further intensify efforts for promoting better understanding and awareness, despite their optimism toward the bilateral relations. The survey also found an asymmetry between ASEAN and Korean youth in their understanding of each other. This year, we further explored youth perceptions through a series of focus group interviews with 147 ASEAN and Korean youth. This morning, our center uploaded summarized the findings on its Instagram and YouTube channels. One of the findings was an unbalanced opportunity for accessing information about each other. While ASEAN youth are given more chances to gather information on Korea through SNS, internet, OTT, etc., Korean youth have limited opportunities. Like the first survey, they regarded each other as a trustworthy partner. In this regard, the survey adduces increasing opportunities for economic cooperation and geopolitically neutral interests as the reasons for forming such youth perception. We therefore believe that the survey findings from this qualitative research can help find a way forward. attaining balanced and equal perceptions may not be achieved in the short term. Instead, it's a long step with huge efforts and patience. And more importantly, it's a step that cannot be done by only one side, but should be done together. Ladies and gentlemen, today's roundtable is 6 ways to enhance mutual perceptions of equal partnership between ASEAN and Korean youth. Through discussions among representatives from youth academia and government agencies and the media, I believe we will learn about views on each other's role in bolstering ties between ASEAN and Korea, as well as young panelists' hands-on experiences and thoughts on their perceptions of each other. I hope today's discussion will be insightful and vibrant and provide a platform that will further pave the way for a more sustainable and balanced partnership in the future based on mutual trust and equality. Lastly, I'd like to express my heartfelt thanks to all the panelists today and those who make this event successfully happen. I wish you good health, the best in the future endeavors. I thank you very much. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Excellency, for your remarks. Next, I would like to invite His Excellency Gandi Sulistiyanto Soeherman, Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia to Korea, for his congratulatory remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Ambassador with a warm round of applause.
안녕하십니까. 제 이름은 간디 술리스티안토입니다. 저는 주한 인도네시아 대사입니다.
Good afternoon. My name is Gandi Sulistiyanto.
His Excellency Kim Hae-yong, Secretary General of ASEAN-Korean Center. I think he is a good partner for me. We are regularly meet. I think even this month I met him already 3 or 4 times. Yeah. And I always try to invite him also to my residence if there is something, related to the ASEAN. We really a good partner. Thank you, Mr. Kim Hae-yong. Honorable panelists, moderator, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me, before I start my speech, as usual, I would like to introduce the textile that I wear today. I and my team, you may raise Pa Riza and Pa Sigit, also wearing a batik. Batik in my country is considered as a formal dress. So I think this is proud for us, Indonesia, to wear this dress because this is also a formal and initiated originally by Indonesian and by UNESCO. Now batik is already stamped as the intangible cultural heritage in the world. So I hope you can give one more applause for batik. All right, I would like to express my profound gratitude to His Excellency, Mr. Secretary General Kim Hae-yong, for inviting me on these important meetings, the roundtable discussion on Korean and ASEAN youth and their mutual perception. This event is important as we will discuss the key finding of the survey in the mutual perception of ASEAN and Korean youth conducted by ASEAN and Korean Center. This survey can provide us with valuable information and feedback from the youth on developing better and more sustainable partnership between ASEAN. Maybe I would like to also use this opportunity to ask the AKC, probably one day you can work with one organization here to make also a survey about the Indonesian perception in Korea. Why I ask this one? Because until today, frankly speaking, Mr. Secretary General and other panelists, probably you don't know that we are Indonesia. Until now, we don't have a free entry visa yet to this country. Since another 112 countries in the world, it has been getting the free visa. I don't know why. That's why I need further, discussion with you and ask you to give some, survey probably about why the negative perception about Indonesia, therefore Indonesia don't get any visa entry, free visa entry. I promised to myself, this is one of my target during my tenures. If I don't get this one, I don't want to leave the Korean forever. So I would like to congratulate ASEAN-Korean Center for accomplishing this survey and convening this important event. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as you may all know, Indonesia assumed ASEAN chairship this year under the theme of ASEAN Matters, Epicentrum of Growth. This theme partly reflects both internal and external challenges faced by ASEAN. With this chairmanship, Indonesia came up with 3 pillars. First is ASEAN Matters, the second is Epicentrum of Growth, and the third is implementation of ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, or IOIP. Along with Indonesian chairmanship of ASEAN this year, Indonesia Embassy in Seoul also became the chair of ASEAN Community in Seoul, or ACS, until June 2023. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia chairmanship of ASEAN also highlight the youth engagement and role in ASEAN. The youth in ASEAN is driving force of sustainable development, as they comprise approximately a third of the combined population of ASEAN. Through the ASEAN Work Plan of Youth, ASEAN aims to enhance youth capacity in education, health, opportunity, participation and engagement, and ASEAN awareness, values and identity. During the chairmanship of ASEAN this year, Indonesia will conduct flagship events relating to youth, such as ASEAN Youth Dialogue, Youth Innovation Challenge, ASEAN Plus Youth Symposium, and some others. These activities will engage youth leaders in ASEAN, including dialogue partners, to convey their aspiration to ASEAN governments and increase the youth's sense of belonging and be filling with the ASEAN community vision post-2025. Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, today's event will provide an excellent platform for all of us to exchange views of current status of mutual perception between ASEAN and Korean youth. Through this discussion, we can have strategy policy recommendation to raise awareness and perception of ASEAN and Korean youth. In closing, let us continue to work together to strengthen ASEAN-Korean cooperation to benefit our people and the world. The aspiration should go to ASEAN-Korean centers, which always work hard and tirelessly to enhance collaboration and mutual understanding between ASEAN and Korea. Thank you very much. Hamsamnida. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Ladies and gentlemen, today's program will consist of 2 sessions that will cover the key findings of the 2022 survey on mutual perceptions of ASEAN and Korea youth and policy recommendations for balanced and equal partnership between ASEAN and Korea. Each session will invite experts from both ASEAN and Korean sides to share their views and analysis on the survey result, as well as to exchange views on how to raise awareness and favorable perceptions for a sustainable ASEAN-Korea partnership. So, without further ado, let us now begin Session 1. Session 1 will begin with a presentation on the result of the 2022 survey by Ms. Siti Maisarah Haji Majid, the Deputy Head of the Information and Data Unit of the ASEAN-Korea Center. After the presentation, Ms. Maisarah will also be moderating the discussions with the invited panelists from government organization, media, academia, and youth. I would therefore like to call on our panelists to take their seats on the stage. And Ms. Maisarah, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon and welcome to Session 1. My name is Maisarah Majid, Deputy Head for Information and Data Unit at the ASEAN-Korea Center. And for this session, I have the pleasure to present to you a summary of the key findings for the 2022 survey on mutual perceptions among ASEAN and Korean youth that was conducted by the ASEAN-Korea Center recently. Firstly, let me provide you with a brief background. This was a 2-year research project launched by the ASEAN-Korea Center in 2021, in which the primary objective was to identify and better understand the current mutual perceptions of ASEAN and Korean youth. The research was conducted in 2 phases, with a quantitative survey in 2021 and a qualitative survey in 2022. So in the 2021 quantitative survey, we engaged over 3,000 youth from both ASEAN and Korea to participate in an online survey. And through the survey, we collected information about their interests and experiences about ASEAN and Korea, the perceptions on ASEAN and Korea relations from various aspects, including on economic, social, cultural, and political perspectives, as well as their views on the cooperative relations. In the 2022 qualitative survey, we gathered 147 ASEAN and Korean youth, aged between 19 to 34 years old, with the aim to get a better and deeper understanding about the rationales behind some of the key findings that we observed in the first survey. Additionally, through the collection of qualitative input from interviews with these youths, the second part of the survey project also aims to provide some potential solutions to building a more balanced mutual perception among youth and to promote more active and meaningful exchanges for a better ASEAN-Korea future. Just a quick share on the design and methodology used for the 2022 survey. So it was a focus group interview that was conducted both online and offline and included 147 youth, as I mentioned before, which comprised of 107 local ASEAN youth from 9 ASEAN member states, 20 ASEAN youth who were residing in Korea from all 10 ASEAN nationalities, and also 20 Korean youth living in Korea. And similar to the first survey, all of them were aged between 19 to 34 years old, and mostly as students, young professionals, or office employees. So in the focus group interviews, questions were pooled among 3 main areas of investigation, as shown in the slide, in which we asked youth to share a little bit more in detail about the how and the why of the answers that they provided. On the first area, regarding youth perception on ASEAN and Korea, we asked a number of questions, such as on the images that they have on ASEAN or Korea and the level of interest. And among the findings for perceptions, which I'll elaborate more after this, there were 2 key observations for this area. One was that many of the youth perceptions are focused on socio-cultural images, and secondly, there appeared to be an asymmetry in exposure in information, experience, and content between youth of both sides. Like in the first survey, we asked the youth to share about what images they have when they first think about ASEAN or about Korea. Compared to 2021, youth raised many similar images as before. For example, ASEAN youth mentioned images such as K-pop, K-drama, kimchi, hanbok, and K-beauty, while Korean youth raised images of ASEAN related to hot weather, vacation, low price, and developing country. The new findings in 2022, however, also showed that ASEAN and Korean youth had a slightly wider range of images on one another. For example, some of the new images that, of Korea that was raised by ASEAN youth included such as plastic surgery, R&D, and innovation. Meanwhile, some of the new images of ASEAN that was mentioned by Korean youth included blue ocean, rising star, diversity, fruits, and football. However, overall, the perceptions or images that the youth shared are very centered on socio-cultural aspects. For ASEAN youth, many of the images are influenced mainly from the interactions with Hallyu, such as from K-pop music, K-drama, and also in their interest to travel to Korea. They are also very much aware of brands and products that originate from Korea, as they have ample exposure or access to Korean brands like Samsung, LG, and Hyundai, and they also have a great affinity for Korean foods. Meanwhile, for Korean youth, many of the images of ASEAN are also focused on traveling to some of the ASEAN countries. And they mentioned ASEAN as a place for vacation, it's hot and humid weather, and friendly people. Many of them also commented on the interest for ASEAN food, mentioning that it is now becoming more easy for them to find ASEAN food in Korea. For example, there is a number of maybe Thai and Vietnamese restaurants available here in Seoul. Additionally, Korean youth also shared new images such as depicting ASEAN as a blue ocean or a rising star, showcasing some acknowledgement of ASEAN's potential for greater growth in the future. However, it is also observed that both ASEAN and Korean youth do not seem to have a lot of deep awareness about the foreign relations that exist between ASEAN and Korea. And in terms of the key source of information for the youth, it mainly comes from social media platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, or other online platforms like YouTube and Netflix. Moving on to the second observations of this first area on perceptions. From the first survey, we also saw that there seemed to be a significant difference in the level of interest and favorability that ASEAN and Korean youth have for one another. We saw previously that ASEAN youth had a higher interest for Korea, while Korean youth had a slightly lower interest and favorability for ASEAN. Hence, in the FGI in 2022 survey, we asked youth why they think such gaps exist. The responses from the focus group interview show that this could be due to an asymmetry in exposure to contents or information about one another between ASEAN and Korean youth. On one hand, we observed ASEAN youth having more frequent and constant exposure to Korea in their daily life, especially through, and this is likely due to the fast-growing, expansion of Korean soft power, especially in ASEAN countries, especially with the high popularity of K-dramas and K-pop culture. And this also has greatly influenced their awareness and interest on Korean products or to visit Korea personally to experience their culture. Additionally, advanced technology and the fast internet available now also makes it easy for them to access information or buy products from Korea. On the other hand, Korean youth have comparatively less exposure to ASEAN-related media, contents, and products. Additionally, many of them, of the content that they do access, it's mainly limited to areas related to tourism, food, or sports. For example, some of the Korean youth quoted that they are not aware of any ASEAN companies or products, and that the interest for football in ASEAN are also influenced by the interest to follow the presence of Korean figures or coaches, or Korean coaches who coaches the national team in ASEAN. So moving on to the second area that we investigated on P2P exchanges. So overall, there were also two main observations that we could maybe highlight, is that one, youth prefer short-term programs over longer-term programs, and that demands for expanding opportunities and improving accessibility of youth exchange programs were raised by the youth. In 2021, ASEAN and Korean youth agreed that having scholarships and exchange programs is important as a means to encourage exchanges with one another. In the FGI session for 2022, we asked about their views and feelings towards long-term studying and on participating in youth exchange programs, specifically also with ASEAN and Korea. Overall, as I mentioned, they showed a little bit more preference for short-term programs over internships or studying abroad. And let me share with you why. From a general point of view, I think they were very interested on opportunities for studying abroad, but many of their responses that they shared tend to lean towards choosing more developed countries or English-speaking countries as a destination for studying. And both youth also shared similar measurement of standards when considering for studying abroad, such as on what is the quality and reputation of the academic institution, the safety of the country, living costs, and also in terms of language. And this in some sense, these are also some of the practical issues that they consider when they think about whether ASEAN or Korea would be an attractive place for them to study. Many ASEAN youth acknowledge Korea's excellent education system and the potentially higher salary opportunities that they could obtain if they find a job in Korea. However, they are also highlighted that there are other factors that would make them reluctant to choose Korea, and this includes such as the perceived difficulty in communication due to language barrier, higher living costs, as well as the expected competitive environment for learning in Korea, as well as the perception that there is a strict working culture based on what they see in media or what they hear from friends. And specifically for ASEAN youth who studies or resides in Korea, I think these are based on their personal experiences of observation of such culture as well. On the other hand, Korean youth did not show as much interest on ASEAN as studying destination because they maybe feel that the education system in ASEAN might be less reputable compared to those in Korea or in Western countries like the US. Additionally, this also made them unsure about whether getting an education in ASEAN would have a good effect or not on their future career opportunities. But despite so, there also were some positive responses. Some Korean youth viewed that it could be cost-effective to study in ASEAN and that it could be an attractive place to learn diverse language like English or the local ASEAN language. Meanwhile, for youth exchange programs, ASEAN youth showed keen interest towards opportunities for exchanges among youth, especially of those with Korea, and highlighted that these programs can help in expanding network and broadening their mindsets to experiencing new cultures and environment. On the other hand, Korean youth had a little bit of a mixed perception where I think some of them highlighted that it could be useful for their personal experiences, but there were also some skepticism about the general overall effectiveness and advantages of such program for them. So in improving these efforts, ASEAN youth suggested making more courses in English available to attract more ASEAN students to come to Korea, and improving online accessibility of information in platforms that youth are likely to use. Meanwhile, for youth exchange programs, youth suggested that more programs should be offered and that improving awareness and accessibility of such programs can be made. For the last observation, we asked about their views on the last area, we asked their views on the cooperative relations between ASEAN and Korea. Again, there are two key observations. In the previous first survey, we asked ASEAN and Korean youth to rank each other in terms of how trustworthy and helpful they feel the countries are to them. And both local ASEAN youth and ASEAN youth residing in Korea selected Korea as the country that they have the most trust among the choices of countries provided, and they also ranked Korea third in terms of helpfulness. Meanwhile, Korean youth ranked ASEAN third behind US and Australia in terms of trust and selected ASEAN as second most likely country to be helpful. In the 2022 survey, however, we found that ASEAN and Korean youth do recognize each other as an important cooperating partners. And for those who shared a high trust for ASEAN and Korea, we found that the reasons for the high trust are based on two key factors. Firstly, which is the vast economic opportunities that ASEAN and Korea can offer to one another. And second is due to the perception that there are neutral political interests for one another between ASEAN and Korea. So in terms of cooperative relations, ASEAN youth tend to use a more economic lens when viewing relationship with Korea. And they shared that Korea could be an important partner based on the economic benefits that could be fostered through FDA, ODA, or knowledge sharing, and that this could create new opportunities and job prospects in their respective country. They also mentioned that it could be a win-win synergy between ASEAN and Korea because of the big working population in ASEAN and the potentially higher salary for careers in Korea. And lastly, they also see that fostering close relationship with Korea can lead to credible and mutual partnership. Meanwhile, Korean youth acknowledged that there are vast opportunities in terms of economic opportunities for Korean companies when working with ASEAN, and that partnering with ASEAN is an opportunity to diversify and expand foreign partnership. They also feel that ASEAN can be a trusted partner because they think ASEAN has less likelihood for political retaliations against Korea, and that the growing increase in multicultural families in Korea can be further positively fostered with a good relationship between ASEAN and Korea. However, despite so, ASEAN and Korean youth still do not yet perceive each other as equal partners, probably because they think that there are different needs or differences in economic development that makes them sort of not yet reaching that kind of perception of equal partnership between ASEAN and Korea. So, and lastly, in my last slide, I also like to share that in the survey, we found that ASEAN and Korean youth also agreed that government, education, institutions, and companies, as well as youth, can play an important role for enhancing partnership, and that in increasing cooperation with Korea, ASEAN youth think that cooperation in advanced technology and global issues would be important. Meanwhile, Korean youth think will have higher interest in enhancing economic cooperation. So if you're interested in the full findings, there is the publication available now online as well as a hard copy, and you can read the full findings of this survey results. But for now, this concludes my presentation for session 1. Thank you so much for your kind attention, and I will now move on to the discussion part for this session 1. Let's begin straight away. We have only a limited time, I think about an hour left for session 1. So we have with us today 7 very special and guests from ASEAN and Korea. Let me introduce very quickly each one of them. First, on my left, we have Mr. Ahmad Fahmi, who is the Minister of Counsellor at the Malaysian Embassy here in Korea. Next, we have Mr. Chul-gun, the CEO and executive editor of the Korea JoongAng Daily, which is Korea's leading English newspaper. We also have with us Ms. Tran, who is the chief of Seoul Bureau for the Vietnam News Agency, government news agency in Vietnam. We also have 2 professors from the academia who are part of our advisory committee for this project in 2022. Please welcome Professor Yoon Jin-pyo, Professor of Political Science from Sungshin Women's University of Korea, and Dr. Hu Chu-ping, Senior Lecturer on Strategic Studies and International Relations from the National University of Malaysia. And finally, we are also joined by our 2 young ladies here at the end, who are potential future leaders for ASEAN-Korea partnership. We have Ms. Kim Joo-hee, master student from JoongAng University, who has prior experience in studying and interning in Vietnam, as well as from ASEAN. We have Ms. Amira Azia Hasti from Brunei, who is currently studying Masters of Law at Sungkyunkwan University in Korea, and is currently also the president of the ASEAN Youth Network in Korea, a network that actively reaches out to ASEAN students in Korea in promoting awareness about ASEAN and Korea relations. So let us all give them a big welcome. Thank you, and let's begin right away. So similar to my presentation, I will orientate this session based on 3 key areas. that I mentioned earlier for the FGI. So I would like to hear some of your views and perspectives on some of the questions posed today. So we have limited time, so I think I hope that each speaker can share their views in a very concise way and keep to maybe about 2 to 3 minutes per question, per person. Okay, so I will go on to the first question, discussing the first area on youth general perceptions for ASEAN and Korea. And I will begin with our youth speakers here. So Juhi and Amirah, from our survey findings, we found that many of the youth mutual perceptions focused on social and cultural aspects like tourism and K-pop, and that understanding on foreign affairs may be minimal. So what do you think about this finding? And maybe you can share your experiences on what your initial or current images are of ASEAN and Korea. And why do you think that images are very centered on social cultural aspects? So maybe Juhi first, and then maybe I can invite Amirah after that.
네, 제게도 아세안 국가에 대한 첫 이미지가 이번 청년의식 조사의 결과와 매우
So my initial image is quite similar to the result of survey. I studied Vietnamese, and before I went to the college, that I didn't know much about Vietnam and also the ASEAN. So after entering the college, that I wanted to study more about Vietnam. So I chose some familiar subjects which are involved on culture or tourism and food. So my initial interests were centered around those cultural subjects. And also when I met friends from Vietnam, and then they love the K culture, so that is why they wanted to study in Korea. So Korea and ASEAN, we have so many commonalities in culture, and I think it's because that these topics are attractive and also they are accessible, easy to access. When I studied in the university, I visited Vietnam as a local survey project, and Vietnam was the first Asian country that I visited Vietnam because, but actually my initial image was not that good because I was quite nervous and I was told that I have to be careful of pickpocketing and also like taxi scheme. So I was afraid to go to Vietnam. However, and also one difference I noticed is that there are so many bikes on the roads, and sometimes there are no traffic lights, and sometimes I had to rush. So these things made me scared about going to Vietnam. However, luckily that I get much better, and because I find much interesting and a lot of attractive things about Vietnam. I think it's because that I have met good people in Vietnam. Well, some of the friends did their best to tell me more about Vietnam by using the translator on their web, on their app. So while studying in Vietnam, I met very good people. And then their Korean was excellent. I mean, they wanted to study Korean very much, so I was touched by them. So by meeting these good people, I happen to know ASEAN is a family and like a friend. And ASEAN is a region with a great energy.
Yes, for me, my experience is also similar with the findings that AKC observed. So my earliest exposure to Korea was actually through Korean drama like Gong and Chumong. It was during my elementary school years. So because I was 8 years old, 9 years old, it didn't really give like a impression because I was so young. Not until I was in high school, it was when Hallyu Wave, the Korean K-pop and K-drama became popular globally as well. So I was surrounded with friends who started to be interested in Korean culture because of K-pop and K-drama. So because of that, that's when my interest in Korea also naturally developed, like from K-pop, K-drama to Korean culture. And then when I was in that period of time, my first impression of Korea and Korean people was that, oh, through the Korean entertainment industry, I was like, oh, the Korean people are very hardworking since like a very young age, just to for their future living, right? And then after spending a little over a year in Korea, my perception didn't change significantly, but I get to know more about how Korean history and Korean history and Korean social problem is in Korea compared to when I was in high school. So, for example, as I mentioned earlier, my first impression of Korean people was that they are very hardworking. So I came to know that this was also as a result of the Korean War back then, because to develop the country as it is now, they needed resources, and the people was what they had. So human resources was important, and now it developed into the Korea it is now. And then because we lived through this digital revolution era, TV, internet, I think that is why we have this socio-cultural aspect that we see with ASEAN and Korea images. It's because through this digital revolution, we can easily access to the socio-cultural aspect of Korea and ASEAN. And then I also think that social and cultural aspect of ASEAN Korea is the easiest way to learn and to diverge ourselves inside a country, into the country that we're interested in. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Juhi and Mira. I think there were very interesting points. I think, as you mentioned, sometimes perceptions when you experience the country will change because you understand better on what's the reason why a certain culture is like that. So thank you for your insights. So I also want to touch about from the first survey, we found that there's the gaps sort of in interest between ASEAN and Korean youth. And in the second survey in 2022, we determined that maybe this could be because of the asymmetry in exposure between ASEAN youth and ASEAN Korea. Like Amira mentioned, you watched Korean movies even from when you were in Brunei. So I want to pose to you both again another question. Whether do you think that there is such asymmetry existing between ASEAN and Korean youth? And do you think this is also a reason why there is a gap in the interest? So maybe Juhi again first, and then Amira.
Yes, I agree that there is a gap in ASEAN. Not everyone tries to learn Korean to enjoy the content of Korean culture because there is an abundant content already. So I believe that's the result of Korean Wave. So although it is not hosted by the Korean embassy, the students can access various content through communities or websites, and they can learn Korean style makeup through influencers. And there are many ASEAN youths who are dancers, and they make the dancing videos. So we have these kinds of abundant popular videos available. So although Korea is not making much efforts, it is already enjoyed by so many ASEAN community. That is why there is a higher interest toward Korea by the ASEAN community. Meanwhile, there is no ASEAN wave, obviously, and there is no popular content yet. So there is the lack of popular content, and still, the word ASEAN itself is not widely known enough. And between the youth of ASEAN and Korea, there is the asymmetry of information, and I thought about two reasons behind that. First, of course, it could be different in the country, However, there is a higher portion of Korean-related department in universities of ASEAN countries. However, when we look at the portion of ASEAN-related departments installed in Korean universities, there is not many opportunities for Korean youth to learn about ASEAN. So that is why it is hard for them to produce related content on ASEAN. And second, the traditional media of Korea has depicted ASEAN in the same way over and over.
The reason is because that the entertainment shows or the broadcasting shows, when they feature about Southeast Asia, they are mostly talk about multicultural family or the migrant workers. So to Korean youth, ASEAN lacks attractiveness. Rather, to Korean youth, maybe ASEAN is seen as a region that we need to provide assistance.
For me, I do think that there is imbalance in the exposure of ASEAN and Korean contents to the youths. So for Korea-related content, we can see it everywhere currently because of Hallyu Wave. So Hallyu Wave has become this big force that we have to acknowledge. So Koreans and non-Koreans alike, they start making contents related to Korean, as Junie have mentioned earlier. And then with this content, they cover from Korean entertainment to K-beauty to tourism and culture. So that is why ASEAN youths are easily exposed to Korean culture. But in contrast, ASEAN-related content in Korea is lacking, but I do think that it is improving, but gradually. So from my experience, back then when I was watching like South Korean channels, I did not remember watching any ASEAN-related content until like a few years ago. A few years ago when I watched a variety show, I was actually surprised that they started introducing some countries, including ASEAN countries, as a travel spot, travel hub. So that's where like celebrities, Korean celebrities, were showing how they experience ASEAN as a travel spot. And then recently also, I noticed that in YouTube, there has been like increase of Korean content maker that are working or studying in ASEAN countries. So they've been sharing their life in ASEAN countries, how they're working, how they're trying to bridge the cultural barrier and language barrier as well. So through that, I think that is another way to expose ASEAN culture, and also a way to expose ASEAN not just as a travel hub, but also as a hub for education and working. Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you, Amira and Juhi, again for sharing your thoughts. I think it's very encouraging that, like what Amira says and what Juhi says, there are maybe increasing number of ASEAN content, but maybe not as much as Korean content in ASEAN. So perhaps I can also bring this similar question to both our speakers from the media in terms of balance of information and content that we see in the respective media platforms. Perhaps can you share about your opinion about the amount of content available about ASEAN in Korean media and vice versa, about the content of Korea in ASEAN media? Do you think there is an imbalance, or do you think, how do you think we can seek the media support to improve the balance of information between ASEAN and Korea, not only in entertainment but in other areas as well? So can I invite Mr. Cheong from Congratulatory first, and then Ms. Tran from Vietnamese news agency.
예, 지금 한국과
So now,
아세안 간의 콘텐츠 교류가 약간
the content
불균형한
exchange
상태긴 합니다.
between
그래서
Korea
특히
and
이제
ASEAN is unbalanced for sure.
2021년에
So in 2021, the Squid Game was broadcast through Netflix, and it was the global #1 content. So that is why the Korean drama series is always one of the top content on Netflix, ASEAN, so including Psycho, But It's Okay, or Crash Landing on You, and even the Itaewon Class. However, I do not think that it is one-sided. So recently, when we look at Netflix, ASEAN films are available on Netflix, so it is getting popular not only in Korea but also globally. And recently, I watched a film titled The Hunger. It was produced in Thailand, and it is one of the popular content on Korean Netflix. And a talented young female chef is trained severely by a well-known chef. So it is a story of growth. But when I've watched many Thai films, and I like their mise-en-scène. They have these beautiful scenes. For example, in The Hunger, they use the strong fire when they cook. And when we look at the decoration on the plates, the food looks beautiful, so it looks like an advertisement. And actually, Thailand is a country which is recognized by an international advertisement festival. So it produces quality content. As such, there are many young, talented people in Thailand. And I counted the number of Thai films on Netflix, and it is over 40 films. And they have different genres, including horror, action, and romance. And even through YouTube, I think we can access many ASEAN-related content. So in case of a commercial on pesticide from Thailand, it was watched by more than 1 billion people globally. And it is an interesting commercial. There are actors who are dressed as insects. And it is really fun video to watch. And in Vietnam, there are many films which are remade from the Korean films, such as Sunny. And there is a film titled I'm Your Grandmother, which is also very popular in Vietnam. And I watched Vietnamese version of Sunny, and it followed the original story. However, they adapted it successfully to the context of Vietnam. And I watched I watched Fury, which is a Vietnamese film, and it is one of the popular content on Netflix. So the daughter is kidnapped by an illegal organization, and the mother takes revenge against the organization. And it looks like Taken, which is the US movie. So it is an interesting movie. I recommend it. And we can find Indonesian films such as Big Port, The Night is Coming, Susana, and The Third Eye. So these horror movies are quite popular. So I believe that Indonesia has diverse myths and traditional stories based on religion, so they have a potential to produce nice films and drama series. And the Filipino movie titled Maria was favored by Korean moviegoers, and so the main character is killer. But she became a housewife. However, when a gang threatens the family members, she revives her instinct as a killer. So I believe that Netflix and global OTT platforms could narrow the gap between Korea and ASEAN. And I believe that ASEAN people are talented and very passionate about filmmaking, and they are cost-effective. So the menu for value in terms of content production is quite good in ASEAN countries. And they have abundant population who can work in the field. So that is one of the biggest advantage. So for example, in 1989, Korea wanted to import Hollywood movies. However, filmmakers in Korea were against the import of foreign content because they were afraid. However, many things have changed in the past 3 decades. I believe that now the content producers in ASEAN could work harder until they can find a balance in the content exchange. Thank you very much.
I'm from Vietnam News Agency. Now, our Vietnam News Agency is the official news agency of government of Vietnam, performing the function of state news agency. So that I would like to talk about the thinking about to providing news for the young generation. Our news agency has a function to providing the information for the various type of press and multimedia communication, serving mass media agency and public at the home and abroad. So that now in Vietnam, Vietnam have 73 million internet users. According about 73% of our population, the ranking in the 12th of the world. And so that today we have so many we have more than 93 million mobile phone subscriber using the smartphone. And now in Vietnam, we also currently more than 23 million young people, accounting about more than 22% of our population. I say this number to emphasize that the technology enable the society media is really putting pressure on the new media outlets. And young people now is very special and touches group that the mass media like us needs to pay attention to. And we have to think many kind of news to provide this young generation. As I say now in the news agency for the long time, we have to put the content on the many kind of news, like rap news, so that we can attract the attention of the young generation in our country. And so kind of video clip we have to make to provide the new for the young generation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cheong and Ms. Tran for your insightful sharing of views. I think indeed there is a growing talent of ASEAN films, I think nowadays, and I think maybe if greater promotion to our Korean viewers will perhaps help as well to share, to improve the mutual perceptions. And of course, I think now with advanced technology, a lot of changes are required, even with traditional media versus the the new media like social media or online platforms like YouTube and such. So let's now move on to discuss the second area of the FGI findings, which is on studying abroad and youth exchange. So my next question is addressed to Mr. Fahmi from the Malaysian Embassy. And from the findings, we heard from youth that it is not easy for them sometimes to find information about choosing to study abroad in either Korea or even ASEAN. In particular, I think information about ASEAN education might not be maybe easily available to Korean youth. But I also believe that ASEAN embassies can play a big role in promoting quality education that ASEAN countries can offer. So what do you think? Do you think there's enough efforts currently being made to promote ASEAN education institutions to Korean youth here? And how do you think maybe the role of ASEAN embassies here in Korea can be in promoting ASEAN as an attractive location for Korean youth to study or for work?
Test. Thank you, Maisarah, for the question. I think, as you've said, that I think the interest is there. The interest with regards between ASEAN and Korea is there. Of course, we cannot deny that the interest among ASEAN is relatively more than what there is in Korea. But I think there are several factors that play into that. I think one of them is the language barrier, whereby perhaps Korean youths who are perhaps interested to find information with regards to educational opportunities in ASEAN. I think there is not much websites who offer these information in Korean, because I think, of course, we have all this information in English, but you know, it's sometimes quite difficult for Koreans who are not yet perhaps very well versed in English to understand that the information that is available on the website. So I guess is that what we could perhaps explore and look at is perhaps that for ASEAN to be perhaps more Korean friendly in these terms, and perhaps we could explore on perhaps having a separate or having the information of enrollment on these universities in several languages. Not just Korean, other languages as well. But of course, if you are interested to capture the Korean market, we have to cater to this. So I think one of it is to have this information in bi-languages. Aside from that, I think the ASEAN embassies in Korea, I think most of them are doing promotional work to promote various educational establishments that we have in our countries. We don't just have our national establishments, but we also have internationally recognized universities who have branches in various ASEAN countries. For instance, I can say in Malaysia that we have the Monash University of Australia having a branch in Malaysia. We have the Harriet Ward University in Malaysia. We also have a branch of Xiamen University from China in Malaysia as well. So, and there are various other universities from Western countries and from other countries in ASEAN countries. You can find them. So I think it's not much. It's not much of saying that there isn't any quality education establishments in ASEAN. It's just that we just have to make sure that the information is readily available and it's easy for the Korean market to access. Aside from that, I think I might diverge a little bit. Is that I think in this current generation, our focus span has become shorter and shorter. So like for instance, we were talking about movies. The trend now that I see is that movies which are longer, 2 hours or more, tend to get not popular. Movies that tend to be popular are now getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and that is why now you would see that drama series are getting more and more popular than movies, because movies you have to give attention like maybe 2 hours. But for a drama series, you just have to give attention for like only 45 minutes. That's why Korean dramas are doing quite well. Because previously, Korean dramas, you can see they were like 1.5 hours long, but now they're just 45 minutes. Why? It's because that the current generation now have quite short attention span. I don't know if that's good or not, but that's what I see the trend is now. Because I think now we are more and more busy. Yeah. I still remember the days when my father, who came back from work, he can come back, take a shower, and at 8 o'clock, he can sit down on the sofa and enjoy the news. But I think in our generation now, I don't get that privilege. Whenever I want to sit down and perhaps watch something will come to the phone. Either it's work, friends, so you're always in communication, you're always accessible. So in terms makes our, I think, attention divided, and that is why our attention span tends to get shorter and shorter. So like in this case, for us to promote ASEAN, what my idea is that perhaps, I think most of us know Nas Daily, this short clips he would do some on various topics of interest around the world. Perhaps what we could do is that we could perhaps follow this formula, where we have short clips for the Koreans is that it has to be in Korean. So we have to find one influencer or very famous Korean MC, and he does all this. He goes to various ASEAN countries. He goes to various, and he just reports on 1 or 2 topics, which is perhaps only 1 or 2 minutes long. And I think this would perhaps gather more attention from the younger generation. I don't know if perhaps Joo-hee will agree with me, but yeah, that's what I think. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fahmi, for very interesting insights that you shared. Okay, I think we don't have much time, so I will move on to the third area on ASEAN-Korea cooperation, because I think this is a very important part. So my next question is for Professor Yoon and Dr. Hu, actually. Let me just find it. Okay. This is in relation to the access that young people have towards learning about ASEAN and Korea and the relations between the two regions. So I think as an advocate for stronger ASEAN-Korea partnership, ASEAN-Korea Center is always in the principle that having more young experts on ASEAN and Korea, or at least youth who are knowledgeable about ASEAN and Korea issues is very important, and I will have very good effect to supporting efforts for stronger future partnership. But in the findings, we see that not many youth have this very high awareness or deep understanding about issues aside from K-pop and K-dramas and all that. So what can you share with us, maybe perhaps about the current status of courses and lectures on ASEAN and Korea, which are available in the respective regions? And do you think there is enough or sufficient balanced exposure about subjects on ASEAN and Korea relations in schools or universities? So maybe you can share your views about, what is there any current initiatives that we can do that are currently there that help to cultivate a new generation of ASEAN-Korea experts? So maybe I can invite Professor Yoon first, or Dr. Hu. Professor Yoon first, yes.
예. 제가 전체적으로 우리 그 인식조사 과정에서
So, throughout the
확인했었던
survey,
것은 우리
I
한국의
confirmed
청년들 또
that
아세안 청년들
the Korean
모두가 다
youth
상대방에
and
대해서
ASEAN youth
상당히 긍정적으로 인식하는 경향이
are
많아졌고요.
perceiving each other
또 많아지는
positively,
방향으로 가고
and
있다라고
it is
하는 것을 확인할 수 있었던 것은
increasingly observed as a trend. So it was quite encouraging for me. So from now on, how can we improve further from this already positive perception? That is our responsibility. But taking this opportunity, I would like to mention one thing. So when we hear the word ASEAN, I believe that some people think of one single community. I think it could generate problems. So it is a community of 10 ASEAN countries, and they have different political systems, and they have different socio-economic systems. So they have unification based on differences and diversity. That is the direction ASEAN is pursuing, and it is quite meaningful. So different countries and ethnicities and cultures are mingled together under this association. That is one thing we have to acknowledge first before understanding ASEAN. So when we look at the level of perception, there is a difference among ASEAN youths. So we have to acknowledge this as well. So in simpler terms, now the economic development level is different. So it could impact the level of understanding and perception. As such, the Korean youth is not perceiving ASEAN as a single community. They have different perceptions on each member country of ASEAN. So we have to think about this first. So which country needs Korea's help, and which country could provide help to Korea? So when we ask these questions, the Korean youth gave clear answers. So that is the better perception of Korean youth on ASEAN. So that is why when we talk about the perception level of Korean and ASEAN youth, we can talk about the average. However, we should understand that there is a difference among countries. So that is one thing we have to keep in mind. And both of the Korean and ASEAN youths would like to expand the youth exchange program. That is a consensus. And in Korea, we have developed a lot of youth programs, and we are implementing such programs. However, they are mostly scattered efforts, and it is more of a one-time event program. They just would like to spend the budget allocated before. That is why, from the perspective of effectiveness, we have to rebuild the program in a more systematic manner. Now, I'm not aware of other countries' system, but when I conducted research myself, I believe that Korea should learn the long-term and focused system to have a better outcome. So I'm not saying the government should control everything, and I'm not saying that there should be a guideline published by the government. However, when we look at the direction of the program, the government should be able to present it. And ASEAN-Korea Center could play a role in the process as well. You can help us to operate the program more smoothly. So this is my suggestion. And the programs hosted by the ASEAN-Korea Center could be an example for other following programs. And to expand the youth exchange program, it is one thing we should do. However, the method and scale could be different. But when I look at other countries' examples, when we look at the scale and method, there should be two tracks. So the general program and the specialized programs. So for general programs, we can target wider group of youth. So it could be a short-term mutual program inviting youth to each other. And the specialized program is a more long-term and focused program for a smaller group of people. So when we have a specialized interest, so we can select students from the respective country, and we have to provide a scholarship accordingly. And universities between Korea and ASEAN countries should work together closely for this kind of a program. So if they would like to select Korean students to study at an ASEAN country's university, I believe that they can think of some incentives to provide to the Korean students. That's it for my comment.
So thank you, Professor Yoon, for sharing the special program that exists between ASEAN and Korea. So I think I would like to point out the gaps between ASEAN and youth perception due to the different level of exposure. So like Joo-hee shared earlier, that Korean studies in Southeast Asian countries are much more developed, well developed as well. In return, the Southeast Asian studies in Korean universities are very limited to niche universities. JoongAng University is one of them. So we have Kyosunim and Ha-seng represented here today. So that speaks to the level of how widespread a certain discipline is. So earlier, Secretary General, His Excellency Kim Hae-yong also asked me, how many Korean students are there in your university? So I shared that many of them enroll themselves in economic business administration. So in my area of studies like international relations, there are almost none. So, but there are many Southeast Asian students studying international relations in Korean universities. So I think to enable that kind of mutual recognition, we need to have government to promote. So many thanks to Mr. Fahmi for doing your part in Seoul. And I think it is really great that we have an ASEAN committee in Seoul. So perhaps in a collective way, we can showcase through the education expo held in Korea, not just in Seoul, but also in other regions of South Korea. So even in media representation. So I think young people don't really acquire information from official channel, from government website, from government social media, also not quite there. So in the way, that also speaks to the differences of how Korean youth and different Southeast Asian countries' youth access information. For example, in Vietnam, I would believe that the government news agency is very influential. In comparison to Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, it would be the private media that gain more traction among the young people. So in that way, I believe that people-to-people exchanges matter a lot because of how Amira and Juhi's experience. So that personal linkages when you make friends with people from another region, from another country, it makes a difference. So I also want to thank Korea Foundation because of their education research grant that enable when I was a younger student in Korea. So right now I'm known as one of the Korean specialists from Southeast Asian region. So and thereby get invited to today's session. So that kind of a two-way communication is very much needed. So for Southeast Asian and especially at the ASEAN level, we need to promote ourselves better in South Korea so that we can dispel misperception, but also to promote the kind of a positive image and the type of expertise that we have. So on a more equal footing, South Korea and Singapore, they have medical students exchange. For Malaysia, they are engineering students. And for the rest of the countries, maybe it's more on social, cultural. So the different discipline also denote different types of people-to-people exchange and also media and also government exposure. So I think across multiple domain and multiple layer, we can make good use of the Korea-ASEAN Solidarity Initiative to better advance through ASEAN-Korea Center to promote two-way exchanges.
Thank you, Professor Yoon and Dr. Hu for the insights. Let's move on. I think we have about 15 minutes left, so I will go on to the next question, maybe to the media, about the opinion about the scope and coverage of diverse content on ASEAN and Korea in your respective channels. I think you've already talked about it, but I'm just wondering whether do you think there's more that can be done to offer in terms of providing more diverse information about ASEAN and Korea to youth, aside from just focusing on entertainment and such, and also to address issues about language barriers between one another through media and technology? Can I invite Ms. Tran?
So may I answer in Korean? I believe that I speak better Korean better than English. So as a Vietnamese journalist, I do not have much material on ASEAN itself. So let me talk about the Vietnamese cases. So as you just said, the Korean and ASEAN related broadcasting is one thing I would like to talk about. So for now, due to Korean wave, so Vietnam has a lot of demand for Korean culture and other areas, and it is being promoted in Vietnam. So Korean culture and Korean culture-related products are widely known in Vietnam. And now, teenagers in Vietnam has a different way of receiving information.
조사 경과한 대로는
So according to the survey conducted in Vietnam, so every day Vietnamese teenagers use 1 to 3 hours of internet to access information. So I believe that this is important for us to understand. So they use a lot of internet, so we have to think about how we can provide relevant information through this channel. And we looked at what kind of information they search on the internet. And we found out 5 popular items they search on the internet. The first item is social issues. So it accounted for 62% of web page usage. So they look for information on social problems. And the second item is they are interested in sharing information. So it is more than 45% of internet usage. So images and pictures and video clips are shared among internet users through various forums. And the third item is entertainment, and the other popular item is education and work. So based on this survey, we thought about how we can change the structure of news and what kind of information we can provide. So in case of Vietnam News Agency, we looked at the current data we have, and we have changed and restructured the way we provide information to the younger generation. So in case of teenagers, they take different method to find news and information. So before, people read longer text and longer article. However, if now the article has more than 700 letters, teenagers just skip the article. So no matter how quality article we provide, they do not like it if it is long. So we have to think about this number of letters. So we have to contain it, all the content within 700 to 800 words. And the youth prefers image and video clip over text, and they are interested in fun content instead of serious content. So that is why we have produced a lot of video clip to deliver news, and we tried our best to make it fun and interesting. So in case of teenagers, although we produce quality content, it would not be able to target teenagers if it is not fun and interesting. And as the professor mentioned before, so we are living in the era of technology and communication. So the news agency could play an important role. So we can produce customized content for teenagers in an interesting format. So we have to review the process constantly, and we are changing the structure constantly accordingly.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Tran. Mr. Cheong, do you have anything to add?
예, 한국과 아세안의 젊은이들의 만약에 이제 교류에 대한 장벽이
Yes, if there is a barrier in exchange between the Korean and ASEAN youth, I believe that the first is technical barrier and the second is language barrier. So in case of the technical barrier, as mentioned before, we have globalized OTT and the internet and YouTube. And thanks to these new platforms, there is no technical barrier at all. And in case of language barrier, on February 16th, I attended an AI forum, and the startup called Superton was acquired by Hype, which is a company which produced BTS, and the Squid Game's lines were translated based on the voice recognition technology. So film director Bong Joon-ho said this at Golden Glove Award in 2020. So if we can overcome the 1-inch barrier of language, much more people could enjoy quality movies. I believe that we can overcome this very soon. The Korean is one of the widely learned language among AI techniques. So Korean, Indonesian, and Vietnamese, these different languages would pose a challenge in terms of language barrier, but however, we can find a solution in AI. So then what is the biggest hurdle? I believe that stereotype would be the biggest barrier for us. So in 2021, according to the survey, most of the Korean youth thought of developing country, heat wave, and poverty when they heard ASEAN. However, I believe that that is because that they didn't learn enough about ASEAN. They didn't learn it from schools, and they are not interested enough. So they never saw ASEAN when they learned the world history. However, if they visit Angkor Wat in Cambodia or Prangbana Temple in Indonesia, they are registered on UNESCO. If they visit there, it will be comparable to popular European heritage. So it can be the pride of Asia in terms of culture, in terms of traditional culture. However, Korean youth does not have enough knowledge on this. So when they look at Singapore, which is a affluent country, they believe that we can learn something from Singapore. However, for other countries, they neglect the abundant history and culture of those countries. They just look at the economic side. So we have to overcome this stereotype and misperception. It would contribute to lowering the barrier between Korea and ASEAN. So this is my dream. So there is an increasing popularity of ASEAN content and films. And when we look at Lisa from Blackpink, she is from Thailand. I believe that she's the pride of Thailand. And Korean people think she is more of Korean because she is working for a Korean girl group. But I believe that we have to change this kind of a perception. And when we think about why Angkor Wat civilization vanished, this would be an interesting content. So it can use a Korean capital, but we can tap into the cultural heritage of Cambodia. That could be a nice cooperation between two countries. And overcoming stereotype is one thing we should work on right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cheong, Ms. Tran, I think for your points. I think especially with the differences in the current generation, and I think advancement in technology, there needs to be a bit more creative and innovative way of approaching the issues that we are facing today for perceptions. And hopefully, I think this can be done in a, potentially change it positively. So I think we don't have much time. I'll just have one more last question on trust and equal partnership. I think this is great if I can ask Mr. Fahmi and maybe the academia to address the question. So as we heard that they are technically, the youth from ASEAN and Korea recognize each other as important partners, and there are some high trust for one another. But there's also some who are skeptical to put ASEAN and Korea above, bigger major powers like U.S. and China. So I think many of the findings were very focused on economic cooperation, and they don't see yet that there is an equal partnership. So I just wanted to maybe get Mr. Fahmi, Professor Yoon, and Dr. Hugh to share maybe 1 minute each, if you can, very, very briefly, to share about your views about equal partnership, and how you see equal partnership between ASEAN and Korea. So maybe Mr. Fahmi first, is okay? And then Professor Yoon and Dr. Hu. 1 minute.
1 minute, okay. Thank you, Maisarah, for the very interesting question. So with regards to, I think if I understand correctly, the perception, right? Perception of equal partnership. Right, okay. Okay, 1 minute, yes. Okay, I think we are getting there. Although I know is that, well, because the perception is that there is still a part where they perceive, when they hear the word developing country, the perception that people will get is normally that, they're not there yet. They're developing. They say they're not developed status, whereby Korea is already a developed nation. So, I mean, that itself is already confusing people, or perhaps, implanting a certain image onto people. But I think now if you see ASEAN, I think you all know that ASEAN, we are very humble people. We don't like to brag. So that's why we still like for us to tell people that we are still a developing nation. However, if you set foot in Jakarta, if you set foot in Hanoi, if you set foot in Kuala Lumpur, you would find that, I don't think this is a developing nation, because you would find all of these capitals, Singapore, for instance, you would see these capitals have marvelous public transportation, although I wish there were more. But you could see that, for instance, in Jakarta, in Thailand, you could see fantastic public infrastructure. In Malaysia, in Singapore, even in Cambodia and Laos. They're developing very, very fast right now. So in terms of, I think we are getting there. I think it's just a matter of when ASEAN is brave enough to say that we already developed. That's all. Thank you.
1 minute is too short, but still. So the perception on the equal partnership is attributable to difference among ASEAN countries. There are 10 countries. That is why we have to wait a little longer for the perception on equal partnership. So we have to make our way toward this. But we have to fight against our stereotype and misperception. So we have to correct such negative perceptions first. And the Korean youth is less interested in ASEAN because of economic priority. So for the youth, they always care about career development and employment. That is why, compared to the US and China, ASEAN was less favored, but it is natural. However, between the youth of Korea and ASEAN, they perceive each other as a trustworthy partner. I believe that this is positive enough. We do not have political tensions, and I believe that we are perceiving each other, the unique partner which could develop together. So if we make further efforts, I believe that this is a meaningful starting point for us, so we should not give up. So let me ask for your help. So the academia and experts, all of you here, could promote the charming points of ASEAN. So this is my closing remark. Thank you very much.
So I think as part of today's subtitle of the event, Equal Partnership, one of the major hurdle, I think, internally for ASEAN is that we are 10 countries and that we have 10 different government systems, economic status and societal culture. So it has that bilateral and also multilateral differences. So in order to help us to better understand the inequality in mutual perception, one perhaps can rely on the country specialist that is already existing in Korea. So Soeherman University is also having a Korea Institute of Association for Southeast Asian Studies. They have country specialists on Malaysia, Myanmar, Indonesia, Thailand. So that would help Korean people, Korean youth especially, to better understand differences that exist among the Southeast Asian countries. And then bilaterally, in terms of foreign policy and also exchanges, I think Southeast Asia also, through the government effort, through the diplomatic corps, can help Korean people to better understand what it's like to be in the country or in ASEAN. So again, the equal partnership also require a lot of the funding opportunity. So this would come to another hurdle of the mindset. So for Southeast Asian, I think majority still have the aid recipient mindset. So if you ask me as a Malaysian, I would think that Vietnam should graduate as the ODA recipient because it's developing so rapidly right now. So Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand, I think, is no longer ODA recipient. We graduated from the Korean ODA program. So, so it is that mindset that we can give back to Korea as well. So that would help us to establish more equal footing in future interactions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your thoughts. So I think that's all the time that we have for session 1 today. And before we end, thank you again to all our speakers. And I hope the discussion has been very beneficial to everyone here. So thank you, and please stay tuned for session 2 after this.
Okay, thank you all for the insightful discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, the next session will focus on the policy recommendations toward enhancing a more balanced perceptions among youth, as well as in promoting an equal partnership through raising awareness of youth. The session will resume by 3 p.m., so please stay tuned. Ladies and gentlemen, the roundtable discussions on the result of the survey on mutual perceptions of ASEAN and Korean youth will begin shortly. Before we start the session, I would like to give a small reminder that there is a survey form that placed on your seating, so we kindly ask you to fill out the survey for today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the roundtable discussions on the result of the survey on mutual perceptions of ASEAN and Korean youth. Let's now move on to session 2. The session will begin with a presentation on the policy recommendations for equal partnership by Ms. Kang Ji-hyun, the head of the Information and Data Unit of the ASEAN-Korea Center. After the presentation, Ms. Kang will be moderating the discussions with the invited panelists from government organization, academia, and youth. So now, Ms. Kang, I will now hand over the floor to you.
Good afternoon. As introduced, my name is Ji-hyun Kang. And was PT operated or okay? So my name is Ji-hyun Kang from the ASEAN-Korean Center. This is the publication of our center after the perception survey, and the policy recommendation is included as Chapter 4. For this, we assembled an advisory committee comprised of Korean and ASEAN scholars and ASEAN Secretariat to make policy recommendations based on key findings, which are presented during the first session. I would like to express my deepest gratitude to our advisory committee member for providing ideas throughout our survey and publication process. The advisory committee members are Professor Yoon Jin-pyo from Sungshin Women's University, Assistant Professor Kim Jong-ho from Soeherman University, from ASEAN side, Assistant Director Roger Chiew and his Education, Sport and Youth Division, and lead researcher Ms. Melinda Martinez from Asia's Yusof Isaac Institute in Singapore, and senior lecturer Dr. Hu Chun-ping from National University of Malaysia. The policy recommendation has been prepared not only for the ASEAN-Korea Center, but also for the other organizations involved in ASEAN-Korea relations, such as Government of Korea and respective ASEAN member states, including foreign missions, ASEAN Secretariat, other ASEAN-related organizations, university, academia, and institutions, think tank, and even youth. My presentation is, number 1, how to address the asymmetry of information among ASEAN and Korean youth. Number 2, how to improve the effectiveness of youth exchange program. And number 3, how to strengthen recognition of ASEAN and Korea relations as mutually beneficial equal partners. The current asymmetry in information among ASEAN and Korean youth should be addressed in order to promote mutual awareness. As this survey suggested, a digital platform is now playing one of the most important roles in shaping perception of youth. In this context, development of customized digital content is crucial for youth to gain desirable information on the other region and shape correct perception. So, when we are creating content for YouTube, Reels, or Facebook, it would be desirable to use local language for those who are not native English speakers in ASEAN and Korea, and also properly reflect local culture and sentiment. It is in a similar vein to say to help youth access more effectively to homepages of relevant organizations, a user-friendly interface, especially in terms of language accessibility, needs to be ensured. Next, it is also noteworthy reviewing collaboration with online creators or influencers as partners for promotion or public diplomacy efforts, considering their significant influence toward youth. Collaboration does not mean inducing or controlling the contents produced by private sector in a specific direction. As social media and the internet were mentioned as the primary source of information for youth, it is anticipatable that information provided by online creators or influencers such as YouTube or Instagram can have a significant impact on influencing the perception of youth. However, when compared with information provided by government organizations and academic institutions that are more refined and credible, the information provided by the independent online creators or influencer would have obvious limitation, particularly in terms of accuracy or credibility. So, we can think about cooperation with them to spread correct and balanced information through their channels. This survey was a valuable opportunity to reflect on the role and direction of ASEAN-Korea Center, because youth programs are the key part of our work, such as ASEAN-Korean Youth Network Workshop, school tour or youth visit programs, or supporting ASEAN student group in Korea, called as AYNK, or digital communication with youth through Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and blog. The center will take note of using local languages or collaboration more actively with ASEAN-Korean influencers to create efficient and practically useful content. I know there must be budgetary and manpower constraint and limitation, but the direction should be oriented. This survey shows that youth exchange programs provide first-hand experience that are very good for raising youth awareness and forming a better understanding through promoting friendship and interactive exchanges. So deeper consideration are required for youth exchange programs. The accessibility to youth exchange programs should be improved. According to the survey, youth, in particular ASEAN youth, pointed out the access to the youth exchange program. To make it easier for youth to get information related to youth exchange programs, it is necessary to utilize various means of publicity. Such means includes social media platforms that youth mainly use, or the search engines with high local usage rate. Secondly, to enhance effectiveness of exchange program, a strategic and integrated coordination of such program run by respective relevant organizations should be considered. While there are several relevant organizations who have been operating youth exchange program between ASEAN and Korea for a period of time, it is questionable whether these programs are prepared and operated from more holistic perspective. In particular, as programs are now actively being resumed post-pandemic, it seems that relevant organizations need to think about this together. Thirdly, the contents of youth exchange program must be carefully selected so that proper and balanced mutual perception can be formed. To this end, rather than focusing on one-off events or topics that are limited to only cultural experiences, it is important to review and select topics which can lead ASEAN and Korea youth to recognize and think about the benefits of cooperation. When we think about topics like megatrends such as the climate change, eco-friendly industry, fourth industry revolution, ICT, VR, AI, and renewable energy, as well as the social issues that ASEAN and Korea youth may face in common, like mental health, gender equality, migration issue, welfare, and unemployment. Such topics of exchange program will lead ASEAN-Korea youth not only to practically consider how to solve this problem, but also help form a sense of solidarity through mutual interest, understanding, respect, awareness of the importance of partners. Furthermore, we can also think about common values, sharing similar culture and identity from geographical commonality of East Asia. Rather than relying on superficial similarity, an East Asia identity can build mutual respect and continued interest by forming intimacy among each other. Lastly, but not least, is to language barrier issues. One of the reasons ASEAN or Korean youth hesitate to study or work in Korea or ASEAN region is because of the language barrier, in particular despite the ASEAN youth's high interest in Korea. More language courses or lessons in ASEAN region would be desirable. In addition, when youth study in Korea or non-English speaking ASEAN member state, it is also worth supporting measures like extension of local language courses as a prerequisite course. Or it would be great, if possible, to have the language of ASEAN or Korean as one of the second language options in elementary, middle, or high school. The next is about how to strengthen the recognition of ASEAN and Korea relation as mutually beneficial equal partners. For a sustainable partnership between ASEAN and Korea, it is significantly important for ASEAN and Korean youth to mutually recognize each other as equal partners based on common needs. They need to know that ASEAN-Korea relationship is not simply a one-way relationship that is led by one country or one region. For this goal, it is necessary to make effort to raise and expand youth understanding and mutual awareness about ASEAN-Korea relations in various fields, and we need to make youth aware of the following aspects. The Korean youth's lack of interest in ASEAN seems to stem from their superficial perception that ASEAN would not be able to offer much to Korea due to the gaps in economic and development. ASEAN is already more than we expect. For example, as to Korea's top export region last year, the first was China and the second was ASEAN, and ASEAN is Korea's second largest trading partner. For Korea, even though the differences between ASEAN and China in the value of trade export from Korea was about $30 billion, Korea had a larger trade surplus with ASEAN, which was $40 billion compared to surplus between Korea and China, which was $1.3 billion. Such reflects the importance of ASEAN market to Korea, especially in terms of the trade surplus and diversification of trade partners. Additionally, ASEAN is Korea's third largest destination for foreign direct investment last year. Korea is an attractive destination for ASEAN youth to pursue their studies. As of February this year, ASEAN students made up the largest group of foreign students in Korea, 40% of the total number of foreign students. It is also necessary to provide relevant information with Korean youth about the entrepreneurial opportunities in ASEAN, such as startup and ventures. We want Korean youth to expand their interest in ASEAN as a partner and take advantage of the values of ASEAN's large population and its high favorability towards Korea, IT infrastructure, and large consumer markets. To correct the perception of ASEAN youth that Korea may not be interested in ASEAN as an equal partner, ASEAN youth should have a better understanding and needs to recognize the strengths that ASEAN has. From an economic perspective, ASEAN youth needs to recognize the value of ASEAN's abundant natural and human resources and the important position that ASEAN market holds for Korea. From the perspective of the cultural richness, ASEAN has various UNESCO cultural heritage and rich history. From the perspective of the value of diversity, ASEAN has the best practices, exemplary policies on the multicultural and multi-religious society that could be shared with Korea. So there is a need to make ASEAN youth more aware of these values. Faced with inevitable complex external challenges such as the supply chain crisis and US-China rivalry, it is important to raise youth awareness through a provision of proper and accurate information so that youth, as the key player of the future ASEAN-Korea partnership, can recognize the potential benefits of a strong, reliable, and mutually beneficial cooperation between ASEAN and Korea. In this context, AKC continue to try to enhance mutual perception and raise awareness of each other's values among ASEAN and Korea youth, and hopefully use themselves to work to identify opportunity. So this concludes the policy recommendation part of the presentation, and now we will move on to panel discussion. At this time, I would like to introduce our 7 panelists for session 2 from left to right. From the Korean government organization, we have President Ryu Hae-suk from National Institute for International Education. 안녕하세요, 원장님. Continued from last year Roundtable, Director Rodra Babaran from Human Development Directorate at ASEAN Secretariat, which played an important role as advisory committee member, is joining us again this year via Zoom. Good afternoon, Director Barbara. And Counsellor Mr. Rija Wadarna from the Indonesian Embassy in Korea will be sharing insights as a government official from ASEAN, as well as a member of the Executive Board of ASEAN-Korea Center. Welcome, Mr. Rija. And from the academia, we have Professor Kim Jong-ho from the Institute of East Asia Studies at Soeherman University, and Mr. Melinda Martinez, the lead researcher at the ASEAN Studies Center of Aisha's Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. These 2 panelists are the member of our advisory committee for this survey. Welcome to today's roundtable, Ms. Melinda and Professor Kim. Lastly, as youth representative, our future leader of ASEAN-Korea relationship, we are happy to invite Mr. Lee Jung-woo from Korea University and Mr. Justin Rivera from Hanyang University. Most welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Due to the time limit, let's begin right away. Okay. My first question goes to President Ryu of National Institute for International Education. 유해숙 원장님,
국제국립교육원은 교육 분야 국제교류의 한국 대표기관으로 잘 알려져 있습니다. 한 아세안 청년간 인식 제고를 위한 간략한 정책 지원 부탁드리고요.
international
exchange. So can you please tell us about how we can enhance the perception between the 2 regions? And can you also introduce the Global Korea Scholarship? And can you tell me what function it is taking to enhance the youth perception between the 2 regions? And what are the efforts are you making to enhance the efficiency? Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you. I'd like to thank the ASEAN-Korea Center for making this occasion for us to discuss about the perception between the 2 country and 2 region. I am Ryu Hae-suk. I am the president of National Institute for International Education. We support Korean students. We also support ASEAN students so that they can come here and study. And also we are conducting Korean a language test. For the first question about the raising awareness between the 2 regions, what are the ways So I think the best solution is human exchange. As previously in the session 1, many people mentioned about the importance of human exchange. I think that is one of the key priorities. I'd like to give you one example. My organization have been working to enhance the exchange between Korea, Japan, Korea, China, and Korea, US. In terms of Korea-US exchange, we encourage Korean students to go to the US as part of Western English program, so that Korean students can go there and work and study, and also they can travel. We are sending 300 Korean students to the US. And if we can do something similar with ASEAN-Korea Center, I think it will be both beneficial for Korean and ASEAN countries. And for collaboration with China and Japan, that we are exchanging high school students, university students, and also the teacher exchange. When it comes to the youth perception, the age is a little bit high compared to the teenagers. But we need to also recognize that we also need to target middle school and high school students, because before that they develop certain stereotype, the middle school and then high schoolers need to be exposed to each country and each region's culture. And for us to encourage exchange between the two regions, among middle school or high school, we can introduce them the famous cultures or the famous travel sites, or we can introduce simple language programs. So if I am given such information, that I can work with my partners in Korea. In Korea, one of the important trends in education is developing Korean students to become the international leaders. So I think it's important that our students learn about ASEAN, so please provide me the information. And also we are operating global scholarship program. So from 100 countries, about 1,400 students are coming to Korea to study. We provide two-way airfare, and also they are covered for medical insurance, and of course they are entitled to scholarship, free scholarship. Free tuition. We've been operating this for a long time, and it's been almost 10 years, and about 10,000 people have been entitled to the program, and the ASEAN students came for the students. About 24% of them were from ASEAN. So by tapping into the GKS program, I'm happy to see that many people get more familiar with Korea. And we'll continue to introduce good programs like GKS. Thank you. Mr. Liu, thank you very much. President Liu, thank you for giving me homework. Thank you for sharing your impactful program. Thank you.
Let's move on to listen to the actual experience of youths. Our ASEAN Youth Panel is the GKS students since 2021. Mr. Justin, as a global Korea scholarship student, please share how the experience through GKS helped your perception of Korea and awareness of ASEAN-Korean cooperation, and what could possibly be improved.
I can actually attest to those benefits mentioned, the airfare, the education. But more than that, I can say being awarded the Global Korea Scholarship Program back in 2021 has helped change my life. At the same time, it also changed my perception about Korea. So I knew Korea as early as my high school in the Philippines, and we study about Asian history. And I remember that word, the Hermit Kingdom. That's what they connote with Korea during that time. However, I pictured an idea of being close, being conservative and all. But when I came here, and when I went here 2021, there are changes on how I viewed South Korea in general. The life here, the improvements here, the Cinderella story, if we want to say it that way, the changes from being a receiver of a donation to a country that donates to other countries to help them improve. And as a GKS scholar, we were given opportunities to learn the language. I think that's one of the best ways to initially introduce a person to a culture, to let them experience the language, because the language itself have their own story, how they develop, how they change, and how they are used to communicate within South Korean country. Alongside with able to learn the language, we're also given high quality education. I think this is one thing that we can carry from South Korea and bring to our home countries and be the ones to create positive changes in our society. And I think this is one thing, a good investment for in terms of South Korea, because at the same time as they develop the mindset, they could also develop better understanding between each country. So when I was doing my program at Hanyang University, I would meet not just ASEAN youth, but also youth from different parts of the world. And it's a different experience, yet a very exciting one, because we experience different things. We learn different languages. We learn different culture. And as a person who really aspires to develop himself, it's really a life-changing experience for me. And probably lastly, what GKS or the Global Career Scholarship Program has offered, not just for me, but also for those who have received the scholarship, is that after we do the degree, we have a lot of options in our hands. We have a lot of options, not just here in South Korea, but the world is open for us to venture into. So I think those are the things that helped me change my perception about Korea, about itself, and how it deals with other countries as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Justin, for sharing. From his experience, I can tell that the GKS program is quite influential in the improvement of youth experience and even the life. And let's hear the thoughts of Korean youth. Mr. Lee Jung-woo is currently studying ASEAN as PhD student in Korea University. So as a student studying ASEAN, what inspired you to pursue a PhD on ASEAN? And how can we get more youth interested in ASEAN? 이정 학생께는 제가 현재 아세안 관련 박사과정을
So you
밟고
are now
계신데
studying
아세안
ASEAN in your
전공하게 된 계기랑
PhD. So
그리고
how
어떻게 하면 더 많은
did you
학생들이
decide
한국
to pursue
학생들이
the PhD on ASEAN, and how can what has you interested in ASEAN? Thank you very much for your question.
So if you do not have any experience with ASEAN, so just like me, if you have to study political or social matters of ASEAN countries, might be very hard because you lack motivation. But I studied at a national university in Korea. But I don't have any ASEAN-related background myself. However, one of my professors studied ASEAN. And even in my undergraduate program, he talked about a lot of ASEAN countries' culture. So I got interested during that time. And back then, we had the Chiang Mai initiative, which was iconic East Asian cooperation. So there are abundant research. I believe that the professor made the biggest impact on my decision. So especially in undergraduate program, the professor makes a huge influence. What thesis he is working on impacts the decision of students in later part. So I was hugely influenced by my professor on my decision. So the first point I would like to make is the influence and the route you learn ASEAN. So that is why if we call ASEAN studies or East Asian studies, we have different universities in Korea who offer quality programs. But other than those universities, there are not many courses on East Asia in general. So that is the fact. So that is why I would like to ask many PhD holders to deliver many quality courses on East Asia later. And when we look at the survey result, there was a response that they would like to have a mock UN. So each university has a club which hosts mock UN General Assembly, so they can represent each and every country and they can develop better understanding of different countries. This kind of a personal experience would better opportunities to learn about ASEAN countries. So for one thing, we need to access ASEAN countries through school. That is the most natural way. And other than mock UN, I believe that we can expand such educational programs for students' experiences.
Yeah, it was meaningful to hear from the youth from ASEAN and Korea. Now, I would like to ask a general policy recommendation to Director Babaran from ASEAN Secretariat and Professor Kim. Please briefly share your opinion on the improvement in mutual perception of ASEAN and Korean youth. Director Babaran, a microphone is yours.
Thank you very much. Before offering our policy recommendations, let me just offer our thanks for your invitation to join this panel discussion, and of course, our sincere apologies for not being there in person. On the policy recommendations, I think it's very important to first recognize that there are indeed gaps in the mutual perception between Korea and ASEAN, and that equally it is very important to recognize the needed collaborative actions on both sides to address the issues and promote mutual perception and respect among ASEAN and Korea. So this study is very useful input for such collaborative actions. I'd like to highlight as well the importance of addressing prejudices and stereotypes between ASEAN and South Korean youth or communities in general. Therefore, I resonate with the points earlier raised by other panelists about making sure that people-to-people exchange programs should be embedding these kinds of ideas, principles to address these stereotypes. And in that regard, we should be employing a tailored approach to foster such mutual respect between the ASEAN youth and Korean youth. And to be more concrete, to address such perception gaps, I would like to underline the importance of highlighting topics that the youth can resonate with. For example, since many Korean youths really use economic lens in assessing the importance of cooperation with the region, it would be important for ASEAN to highlight on the opportunities that it can present in terms of collaboration with Korea. On our part, on ASEAN's part, it's also important for us to ensure that there is updated and appealing content made available widely online and offline. And noting the prominence of awareness on Korea among the youths of ASEAN, I would humbly suggest that ASEAN and Republic of Korea awareness-raising initiatives should increase the engagement of South Korean youth as target audience as well. And we need to enhance the availability and quality of ASEAN content, and it has to be available as well in Korean language. So those are my recommendations.
Thank you, Director Babaran. And 김 교수님, 한아세안 청년 상호인식 개선을 위한
And now I'd
정책
like to
지원
ask
발언
Mr.
부탁드립니다.
Kim, Professor Kim, please.
사실 자문위원이라고 참가를 하긴
Yes,
했지만
I'm from the advisory committee, but I don't think I have contributed hugely. I'm so sorry because I'm quite doubtful about the contribution that I have made. But I know that the key people here worked really hard, especially Ms. Khanh here. And I'd like to talk about policy.
고민을 많이 해봤는데 이번 2021 조사도 그렇고
From 2021 and 2022, from the two surveys, that we have found out one commonality, that is startups and career and also jobs. So these are the three main topics. Of course, it's so natural. Youth from the past and the future, they will all think about career importantly. So when we think about exchange, when we come up with the policy recommendations, we have to meet in the half, which is narrowed down into jobs, career, and startups. So if there are opportunities given to each nations, then they will think it's a good opportunity. But from the survey that we have realized that ASEAN youth know that Korea is a good opportunity. However, they are hesitant to come to Korea. Why? Is because, as it was mentioned during session 1, yes, Korean is very difficult. I mean, Korean is even difficult for Koreans, so I can't imagine how difficult it will be for foreigners. So since we have Ms. Liu here, Sejong Institute, and also many universities are providing Korean courses. However, these are only applicable for university students or university students who are working, who would like to go overseas for study. However, also we need to consider the middle class or lower middle class, because we need to target the workers. We are providing zero education to those who are coming to Korea. Those workers coming to Korea, their language level skill in Korean language skill is very low. So that results very tragic results. So in the short term, I believe that the workers, especially from Korea and ASEAN, to enhance youth collaboration, we need to target workers, and also we should provide like night course so that workers can easily learn Korean education. And if they are working in a remote area, then maybe our government can provide support so that they have access to tutors or other media. ASEAN workers are here in Korea, so our priority should providing Korean education to those ASEAN workers, young people working in Korea. And as Mr. Lee mentioned, yes, I definitely agree. We need to have the ASEAN college, the ASEAN, the discipline, the department of discipline should be created. So college and university play a very important role because professors give big influence to students. So if college or the department dedicated to ASEAN created, then that will that will lead to more study in master and PhD. Once the department in college or university is created, then Korean students will better learn about ASEAN. This is a long-term approach. The one I gave you is a short-term approach, but the long-term approach is creating a department and exposing Korean students with more ASEAN studies. In short term, of course, we have to tell Korean youth that ASEAN is a new opportunity. In Busan, every year before COVID, that we used to hold ASEAN job fair, so we have to resume. So we should not only limit ourselves in Busan. We have to go around Korea. So we have to introduce successful businessmen or the Korean people who are working, who have garnered huge success in ASEAN, and they should be invited. And also, we can provide an occasion where businesses can meet, and then they can search good human resources in that occasion. Thank you.
네, 말씀 감사합니다, 교수님.
Thank you, Professor.
그렇다면 다시 류
Now I'd like to go
원장님께
back
질문을
to Ms.
드리도록
Liu,
하겠습니다.
President Liu.
국립국제교육원에서 청년들의
in your
관심을 유도하기
organization,
위해서 어떤
what
홍보
are
활동을
the
진행 중이신지,
public
그리고
efforts
또
are you
홍보
making
활동이나 그런
to
측면에
enhance
있어서
the
저희
interest
센터라든지
of
아니면
youth?
다른 기관과 협업 등에
And
대해서
what are
어떻게
the collaboration
생각하시는지.
efforts are you making to promote your program to youth? Thank you very much. Professor Kim actually made a really good point. Professor Kim mentioned that the Korean students should better understand ASEAN. That's a really good point. And now I'd like to talk about the opposite. I'd like to help ASEAN students better understand Korean. We are not only targeting 10 ASEAN countries. We are providing information about Korean universities and colleges by working with 30 or so colleges and universities. Actually, we visit ASEAN countries to promote our educational institutions. We went to Malaysia, Indonesia last year, and we held a Korea study education exhibition. So many students showed interest. And then we will continue to do that online and offline. We have a system, so if you come into the platform, that you can get good information about Korea, especially Korean universities and what are the visas, then how you can apply for scholarship. And after finishing your work, your study, what are the job opportunities? So this one-stop information is provided on our comprehensive information platform. So through this, I am helping ASEAN students better acquainted with Korea. So please, I'd like to ask ASEAN-Korea Center to promote our website as well. And yes, you mentioned that Korean is difficult, and as an organization that is running Korean tests, that was quite painful to hear that Korean is very difficult. In 45 countries around the world that we have set up Korean institution, Korean language institution, and also the Korean government is working hard to promote Korean. However, yes, it's very difficult to lower the language barrier. However, that we're living in a digitalized era, we are living in a new era where we have to make a digital transformation. In the past, currently, that we are conducting paper-based tests. However, we are transforming it into the digital form. So students, when we are fully ready, students and applicants can take tests on the digital form, on the app or on a phone. And Professor Kim mentioned about ASEAN Job Fair. Our organization is also holding a similar exhibition or an occasion by working with COTRA, because we'd like to help ASEAN students with better job opportunities in Korea. So we are providing job matching opportunities with COTRA. We are working the local government and also the businesses. So we are not only limiting ourselves to only providing scholarship, but we are expanding our scope of work to provide more job support. So that our students from ASEAN can have better support from us. Thank you. Thank you very much, President Liu.
Center is fully ready to support you. Yeah. Yeah. Now let's hear from the ASEAN Secretariat implementing the youth policy. Director Babran. We are well aware of various programs that Education, Youth and Sports Division under your directorate is implementing. According to this survey, it was found that youth perception were limited to social-cultural areas. It would be great if you could share opinions on how to ensure the effective delivery of information among youth audiences, especially on the contents that focus on political or international relations, which are not familiar to youth. Please.
Thank you. So as you just rightly mentioned, there are indeed numerous exchange programs that involve youth from ASEAN and Republic of Korea. These programs that have been implemented in the past already discuss issues such as megatrends, the fourth industrial revolution, climate change, and these have created valuable opportunities for knowledge sharing and transfer, as well as accelerating technological innovation in ASEAN. Perhaps what we can also support in terms of recommendation is to enhance the coordination among other entities that offer similar activities or this similar youth exchange programs, and even expand the outreach, to democratize access to these programs. I also suggest for more opportunities to substantively engage views and experience on how to tackle societal issues that are close to the hearts of young leaders, such as mental health, gender equality, youth unemployment, migration, as well as equitable access to quality education and training, which could become useful platforms for genuine interaction and meaningful collaboration between the youth of ASEAN and Republic of Korea. I think it's important to highlight that, for this to be substantive, we really have to go beyond site visits or cultural tours. The last point I'd like to make is to highlight the importance for ASEAN to strengthen the networks among young innovators and entrepreneurs of ASEAN and Korea, especially for green economy opportunities. This is now a very big thing going on in the region. And this is also in line with the strategic direction of ASEAN Republic of Korea Plan of Action 2021 to 2025 on environmental sustainability. So apart from strengthening these networks, we have to ensure that we support them continuously and enable them to be really good at what they do. Thank you.
So I can't agree with you more. And thank you, Director Babran. Now I would like to address questions to Mr. Rija, Counsellor at Indonesia Embassy in Korea. As Indonesia is the chair country of ASEAN this year, it would be very meaningful to hear insights from Mr. Rija, who is working on the first line of diplomacy. I believe ASEAN embassies in Korea are taking notes of the perception of Korean youth. And in order to enhance Korean youth's perception of ASEAN, what do you think about the role of ASEAN-Korea Center and ASEAN embassies in Korea?
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Kang, for the opportunity to express our position regarding these issues. I think this is also a good opportunity for us to discuss a very interesting and important issues regarding the youth and the perception regarding our two region, Korea and also ASEAN. I think also, as you mentioned, the role of AKC and also ASEAN, I think it's also can be very important in terms of increasing or raising the perception of both countries, of both ASEAN and Korea. As I mentioned before, because as I know, Korea itself put ASEAN in some priority area for cooperation in various fields as, how can I say, dedicated for the special policy from the previous administration by the Korean government, like the NSP, New Southern Policy, and the current government also created the Korea ASEAN Solidarity Initiative, which means that both ASEAN and so Korea has so many potential to be grown and to be developed to further cooperation in the future. And regarding the roles, I think AKC have done tremendous jobs in terms of, how can I say, facilitating and also mediating and also become the bridge of ASEAN to Korea and also Korea to ASEAN in many fields, not only in the economic section, not only in terms of cultural or tourism, also providing valuable and also, how can I say, various information regarding ASEAN and Korea. So everybody in Korea also can access and have better knowledge on ASEAN. But I think because the roles is getting increasing and getting more important, I think I would like also to recommend Secretary General Kim to ask for the Korean government to ask for more budget and also for enlarge the organization and also to, how can I say, more accommodate and also to do more, how can I say, practical projects in terms of increasing the relations between Korean and also ASEAN. And also, I believe Korea, AKC and also the Korean embassies in Seoul have some common tasks and so some common target to how can I say, to promote each Asian countries in Korea and also and the vice versa. And that's why AKC and also ASEAN embassy in Seoul should, I think it's already done, but I think we should increase our collaboration, our synergy in terms of creating more projects, more how can I say, which can directly felt, directly influenced, or directly can be experienced by the Korean, especially youth. I think also where can we start? I think it's also, I want to reflect some of the comment made by the first section of the second section, but regarding we can also utilize what media, what kind of forum that can attract more youth in Korea, for example, like it was discussed like movies. I think it's very, very interesting if we can make some kind of short movies, a documentary. I mean, some stories from the youth, how they how can I say, experience first time in Korea, or how they Korean like Yuji last time, that how she, how can I say, she experienced Vietnam the first time. Maybe the first impression will be like, oh, it's like not quite positive, but after she experienced a couple of, how can I say, and then it become positive. So this is also some kind of very interesting things that we can also discuss, also collaborate later about that. And maybe we can also collaborate with the educational institution also, how we can engage with schools, how we can also do activities with ASEAN, also AKC together in certain school with certain age, and also we can also arrange the proper program in such schools. Like for instance, in the past we also done some kind of like cooking course or some introduction of Indonesian like this batik, something like that, or any other ASEAN, how can I, characteristic or special cultural, something like that. That also can be done, and also will increase I believe it will, because the direct experience is also very important, and will, even though you're still young, we can also remember it's until you are getting old, something like that. And so this is, and just one brief experience. When I first came to Korea, I was at that time still youth, yeah, but not anymore now, more than 20 years ago. I mean, the perception of Korean towards not only ASEAN, but to general perception Korean against foreigners is now getting far better. I mean, in terms of how you welcome, how you perceive, how can I say, treat foreigner is getting better and better. And I believe it's also become one of the points that Korea will grow better and become one of the international communities. Just one quick example. At that time when I first arrived in Korea, I mingled with some Koreans. I'm a Muslim, so they will ask me to join some dinner, something like that. They offered me pork, something like that, or soju, and I just, oh no, I don't drink soju, I don't eat pork, and said, oh, why not? This is very delicious. The drink will make us, getting more friendly, something like that. But nowadays, it's not happening. You're a Muslim, you don't eat pork. They provide you with halal food, so this is very different than the West. You don't drink, okay, you don't drink soju, okay, let's have a chat by drinking coffee, something like that. So this is kind of experience that makes Korea is getting more and more better in the future, I think. So that's my quick comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rija, for your insightful opinion based on your direct experience. And may I pose one more question to you? Through the survey, it was identified that Korean youth lack an understanding of ASEAN's abundant cultural heritage and economic and social values. In the context of a public diplomacy, because you are diplomats, so ASEAN embassies in Korea would be playing the most pivotal role in raising awareness of Korean youth on ASEAN. Can you share ongoing or future programs or projects to raise awareness of your country or ASEAN towards Korean people, especially the Korean youth?
Okay, thank you very much. It was very, I think this is also not, I don't know, other embassy also might done similar or some other program than us. But in the context of public diplomacy, we have some 3 strategies actually. Oh, this is not very advanced strategy, but the first one is the strategic collaboration. The second one is bolder coverage and also comprehensive promotion. So strategic collaboration means we collaborate with Korean or international organizations to have some kind of activities together, something like that. So not only we can also disseminate information regarding Indonesia, something like that, we can also ask people to do things together. So that's the things that we are doing. And also bolder coverage. We disseminate information through mass media and also utilize the social media. So embassies have social media like Facebook, Instagram, everything. So any news, anything like we just blast it over there, and many responses. And may I say that among Indonesian embassies in the world, Indonesian embassy in Seoul has the most followers in our Instagram. So because of we are quite active in doing that. And so the comprehensive promotion, we promote Indonesian creative economy, digital and tech as well. So this is something that we are doing, all of us, not only in the terms of public diplomacy, but also in other section also. So for instance, for the practical issues, practical things that we can also, as the example, we have a class of gamelan instrument, traditional instrument gamelan in Indonesian embassy every Saturday, and also a traditional dance course every Saturday also. So anyone who is interested to join, they may as well as just join the class. So this is something that we are doing also. Before the pandemic, we also do some kind of Indonesian language course in the embassy during the weekend also. And for bigger events, we also have, because this year is the 50th anniversary of Indonesian-Korea diplomatic relations. So we are having some big events like the Indonesian Festival, which will, done in the 3 cities in Korea, Seoul, Busan, and Daegu. So that kind of occasion will also spread our promotion for that. And also we have some collaboration also with universities, certain universities in Korea. For example, we have the Indonesian Corner, Indonesian Center in Busan University for Foreign Studies, in which last weekend we also held some kind of Indonesian festival with culinary festival, promotion, coffee, and also discussion regarding the tourism and cultural. So that's basically what we are doing at this moment to further our public diplomacy strategy in the embassy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Congratulations on the most Instagram viewers. And please pay attention to many programs to the Indonesian embassy are doing now. And thank you for sharing. Now we will move on to the next question, which goes to Director Babaran and Ms. Melinda and the youth panelists. Youth exchange programs can be an avenue to deepen and expand youth knowledge beyond the appreciation for cultural elements. In this regard, both ASEAN and Korean youth highlighted the need to expand the availability of such programs and to improve their accessibility to a wider group of youths. So please share your advice on this. Ms. Melinda, yes, please.
Thank you so much, Soo-jung. First of all, I would like to echo what the survey has highlighted. First of all, youth exchange program must be as inclusive as possible to wide reach youth with disadvantaged backgrounds. And also the topics chosen for youth exchange program must be relevant for all youths from Korea and ASEAN. Such as the report highlighted that climate change, social issues such as mental health, economic inequalities are among the most popular. That's why I think it's very important as policymakers, we are as policymakers to expand the platforms for youth exchange. Sometimes we are too confined to think that youth exchange program must be facilitated by traditional academic institutes such as schools, universities, language courses, scholarship foundation, and those dealing with educational affairs. But there are two important actors to be involved. First of all, I would like to highlight that non-profit organizations, they are very, very influential. Recently, I returned to my home country, Indonesia. I traveled to Cirebon, a very small city. It's not really that popular for international tourists. I met a group of Korean students on the train to go there, and they told me they're part of, I think, Habitat for Humanity Korea, and they're about to spend a couple of weeks building houses and infrastructure in Cirebon, in quite a small city in Indonesia. So I thought that the spirit of social service and volunteerism is extremely strong among youth. So we need to facilitate that more. And then the second of all, the important actor is actually the private sector. I'm very happy that President Rio mentioned that she's going to promote more job-related activities, job searching related activities. I think multinational companies that have presence in ASEAN and Korea must be involved in facilitating this youth exchange program, because they can help to facilitate labor mobility between the two sides. ASEAN and Korean universities, they need to partner up with them to establish, for instance, programs like internship, early career placement, and so on, so that they, both ASEAN and Korean students, they can have the experience of working abroad. The report really shows that both sides, they're interested to explore short-term exchange. So yeah, I think those two actors must be involved in youth exchange programs.
Okay. Thank you. The two actors you mentioned is very important, so we will take note of that. Yes. Director Babran, please.
Thank you. So I support the views already shared by Ms. Melinda. I really agree with them. And on our part, I think since many of the exchange programs that we have been doing in the past are basically nomination-based, it is high time that the relevant stakeholders, the organizers of these events, consider arranging more open calls or more inclusive calls for application for ASEAN ROK exchange programs to allow more diverse participation and, of course, wider outreach. I also share the view that the provision of accurate translation of documents and posters, as well as subtitling of audiovisual materials into Korean and various ASEAN languages, could be considered as an integral part of the ASEAN and Korea awareness raising initiatives in order to reach out to non-English speaking audiences. And also, I think we need to use more of the non-traditional media. We also need to acknowledge the important role of social media content and young influencers from ASEAN and Republic of Korea, and therefore we suggest the engagement of reputable influencers and production of short-term or short-form content to leverage more organic dissemination of information across different social media channels and better connection with target audiences. I think one of our panelists in the previous session already mentioned about this. And finally, I think it would be very important to encourage the youth of ASEAN and Republic of Korea to continuously search for information on available opportunities through reliable online platforms. And I think it's also important to maximize our youth networks, the one we already have in each ASEAN member state in our dialogue partners as well. So those are our suggestions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Babaran. And the same questions goes to Mr. Justin and Jung-woo. Yep.
I'll be echoing majority of what the mentioned strategy, specifically on expanding the accessibility and how we be able to reach with the wider audience. But at the same time, I'll be focusing more on creating the demand for it. Because as much as we push for creating valuable, correct, reliable content, which is already happening now, because if you search in YouTube and all of the Instagram posts, you'll see a lot of contents, not just about Korea, but ASEAN. However, there's a gap in terms of the supply and demand. The supply is very high. However, the demand factor, or who are the ones interested to these contents, to these information, are somehow lagging and needs improvement. Hence, on the youth's perspective, we really need to focus on giving emphasis on education. At the early young stage of their development, let's remove the development of stereotypes in terms of how they see each other by, as early as possible, introduce what is the ASEAN-Korea relationship to begin with. What are the improvements made by this relationship, probably in elementary school, in high school? Teach this information as early as possible. So when they develop their mind and they create this outlook in the future, this specific idea of ASEAN-Korean relationship is important, not just for me being a Korean student, but also in how I interact with the outside world. We will be able to create the demand that has been lacking through time. So, as mentioned, we will be echoing the demand for a quality supply of K content, ASEAN content. At the same time, let's reiterate the need to improve the demand side for it.
So before answering the question, as a youth representative, so many organizations have been doing a great job already. However, I have to raise a requirement anyways, so I have to apologize for what I have to require to you, because I have always asked for more. So the ASEAN-Korea Center and the youth exchange programs are available. However, I would like to expand the scope of such programs. So as Professor Kim stated, so the undergraduate programs are not diverse in Korea, and there are not many scholars, so we will see a limited number of universities. However, we have to find a solution to solve this problem, and as part of this, ASEAN Job Fair is required. I hope we will see the job fair this year. An essay contest is an ongoing project, I know. However, on top of that, undergraduate students would like something helpful for their career development. So it is better to include such opportunities. And the third, I would like to talk about the public-private partnership. The Korea University is working with private companies. So we are working on an educational program in Southeast Asia. So the public partnership is important. However, I believe that the private participation is also important, so they can make contribution in the form of investment, and they can think of the topic for lectures for students. And it could be a little bit off topic, but I'm studying ASEAN. And the most frequently asked question is, so where are you going to work after your degree? So if there is a student studying ASEAN, so I don't want you to ask such a question. Instead, you can ask about their research topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was really meaningful to hear from the perspective of youth. And now I would like to address my question to President Ryu and Professor Kim. 원장님, 그 한류와 같은 기폭제가 없는 상황에서 그 아세안에 대한 그 한국
When
청년들의
there is
관심을
no
높일 수
catalyst
있는
like Hanryu, what would be the ways that we can enhance the interest among Korean students about the ASEAN? I'd like to introduce one of the programs that we are providing is Critical Foreign Language Program. It's one of our promotional programs that we are introducing special languages. We are offering 20 language courses. Among them, we are providing 8 languages from ASEAN. We are working to spread the knowledge about ASEAN, and also that we are working with organizations. We'd like to expose our Korean students with the new languages so that students, teachers, and also adults can learn new languages, because I believe that through language that you can better know about the new culture. So I'd like to continue to work hard. And one of the important programs related to ASEAN is sending Korean teachers to ASEAN. About 60 people a year are going to ASEAN. And our Mr. Kim from ASEAN-Korea Center used to be a diplomat. So we see how many numbers of teachers would like to go So I communicate with the ASEAN countries. So we are sending them to public schools in ASEAN. So they are not only about Korean language, but mathematics, music. So we get these requests from ASEAN countries. So by sending Korean teachers to ASEAN countries, when they stay there 1 or 2 years, after coming back, they of course talk about Thailand, they talk about Malaysia, they become the evangelist of the countries. So I think the influence is very positive. And also we are offering volunteer programs for college students. We're working with the Seoul Education Agency. They are targeting middle and high school students. They're offering online studies, online classes. However, although we'd like to provide good classes to the worldwide, if there are time zone differences, it's really difficult. However, we can work together with ASEAN because if Seoul education or the certain programs or classes are provided with different languages, for example, 5 languages, then I believe that the Korean students and ASEAN students can work together at the same time online. So, we haven't started those programs yet, but since Seoul Education Agency is starting such program, that is one of the areas we can think about. Thank you, Professor. Yes, also we are providing similar language program that we're competing. I'm competing against Mr. Liu. Yeah, there are many places who are providing cultural and language classes targeting ASEAN. However, it's quite disappointing that the Korean youth are not that interested in ASEAN yet. The reason is why the cultural exchange doesn't necessarily mean that enhancing the awareness. I think my age people would know that how China was popular when we were young in our 20s, even though we were not promoting that there were many students who wanted to go to China. They apply for the exchange program first, and if they fail, then they pay for it. They apply for scholarship first, and then if they fail, then they went to China with their own money. So I think I think there is wrong awareness, wrong perception about ASEAN. That time the perception about China was not good. Despite such bad perception, Korean students were willing to go to China to learn China. Until then, German was the second popular language to learn. However, students switched to China. We literally flocked to China, and then the students got the license, HSK, and then they believed it was some sort of a religion. They thought they would get the job after they coming back from China. But why students are not excited as much as China toward ASEAN? From my experience, I believe it's because I think it's something related to language. Behind the China, there was a big test promoted by China, which is HSK. This is something similar to TOPIK. Currently, the 5th and the 6th is the highest, but that time 10th or 11th were the highest. So whether doesn't matter whether they are from Seoul or whether they are from the remote countries, students knew that at least if I can get the 9th degree, then I can get a job. So the students were willing to pay for their trip or their study in China. So those students who can afford to China, studying in China, that they paid for the tutoring, who studied in China, they wanted to learn that hard. So, currently, the difference is that the languages are different in ASEAN. So if ASEAN can work together, And if you promote certain languages and if you connect the language test with jobs in ASEAN, then I think it's a whole different story. Although you don't say that we're going to give you a scholarship. So it's more like a game. Once you have your language system ready, for example, you get certain language sixth grade, or it's like TOEIC or TOPIK. You need to get certain grade, then you can get a job in Vietnam. So if this possibility is about 50% at least, then I believe that the Korean students would go really hard. I mean, China, we feel so cold with China now. Nobody is eager to go to China to study. So in Korea, for example, if students, overseas students come and get the topic, and then they pass, for example, like grade 5th or 6th, then the foreign students would get a job in Korea, then of course they will be willing to get the item, like a game item. So once a certain item is given to young people, then although, I mean, I don't think we have to promote it. Once we get that, then the students will be willing to learn or go to ASEAN.
Here today have made this roundtable very meaningful and valuable. Before we close this session, I'm wondering if Professor Kim and Ms. Malinda, our advisory committee member, have any closing comments you'd like to make. I will give each of you 1 minute.
Maybe I would like to highlight the role of universities or public institutions in facilitating more youth exchange programs. First of all, I think we can see it in 2 different ways. The first one is in a quantitative way, as Dr. Hu already mentioned in the previous session, that we need to increase more joint research, also the number of studies program, ASEAN studies program in Korea, and likewise, Korean studies program in ASEAN must be increased. We should continue with the quantitative side of it. But the second one is actually we need to explore more in a very qualitative way. I think beyond traditional education exchange program like language courses, scholarship exchange, universities and academic institutions can be an incubator for more scientific exploration. Korean and ASEAN universities must start to partner up to do joint research on high-value scientific experiments. I think one excellent example is, as we know, the invention of COVID-19 Pfizer vaccine. It was funded by a group of scientists from German universities. It was funded by American institution, and finally, it was manufactured by an American company, Pfizer. The experience really taught us that no country can really do it alone in creating a solution for global solution for humanity. I think ASEAN and Korea must start to explore this kind of scientific exploration, highly valuable one.
I'd like to make it simple. Academic courses can provide professional courses. I mean, that would be really nice if we can create a department or the master's degree or the PhD degrees. Will be nice, but it's a long term. So I believe that if it's difficult to build a department, that it should be at least like a program that can issue certification. And also, currently there are executive level courses. So once, I mean, we have to, connect the the bridges between the organizations and the currently available programs. So we have the existing ones like executive courses and also the nonprofit organization courses, and we have to bridge that with the universities
I really
together.
appreciate those who participated and joined us today. There are lots of points we should take note of. So now that's a wrap up for session 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for bringing us to a very productive session with meaningful policy recommendations. We have now come to the end of today's roundtable discussions on the result of the survey on mutual perceptions of ASEAN and Korean youth. Before closing, I would like to ask all our online and offline participants to take a moment and fill out the survey for today's program. For online viewers, the link will be shared on the YouTube chat box, and for offline participants, the evaluation form is on your seating, or you can find a QR code for the survey. For those who submit the survey, you may have a chance to get a special giveaway for your kind contribution. So, to close today's event, on behalf of the ASEAN-Korea Center, I would like to convey our deepest appreciation to all the panelists and participants for your valuable time and attention. We hope that today's roundtable was informative and helpful. And please be reminded that the publication of the survey is also available in hard copy as well as on the official webpage of the ASEAN-Korea Center. I hope to see all of you again in the future programs. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.